The dust devil whirled across the barren Wyoming landscape as Josephine Harlow clutched her worn leather-bound Bible to her chest, her dusty ivory wedding dress trailing behind her like a surrender flag. The stagecoach that had left her at this desolate crossing was now just a speck on the horizon, and the shoes that had carried her 2,000 miles from Boston were caked with the red dirt of the frontier. It was 1873, and Josephine Josie, to those who knew her heart, was 22 years old with nothing but determination and a letter from a man she'd never met, a man who would never arrive. "Miss, you've been standing there near on 2 hours." The voice came from behind her, deep and weathered like the landscape itself. Josie turned slowly, squinting against the setting sun to make out the silhouette of a man on horseback. He sat tall in the saddle, shoulders broad beneath a well-worn duster, face shadowed by the brim of his hat. "I'm waiting for someone," she replied, her Boston accent sounding foreign even to her own ears. The rider dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent more time on horseback than on his own 2 feet. As he approached, she could see him clearly, tall and sun-browned, with eyes the color of a summer storm and a jawline dusted with stubble. "Ain't nobody coming this way today," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. "Next stage ain't due till Tuesday." Josie swallowed hard, fighting the tremble in her voice. "Mr. Harold Peterson was to meet me here. We are to be married." The man's expression shifted, something like pity crossing his features. "Peterson's homestead was raided by Comanche 3 weeks back. Word came to town he didn't make it." The ground seemed to sway beneath Josephine's feet. 3,000 miles from home, no family, no money to speak of, and now no future husband. "I see," was all she managed. The cowboy looked at her dusty shoes, then back to her face. "Those shoes walked you a mighty long way to end up here." "All the way from Boston," she confirmed, a hint of pride cutting through her despair. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the temples. "Name's Benjamin Yates. Most folks call me Ben." He gestured to his horse. "I can take you to the nearest town, Cottonwood Springs." "It's about 10 miles west." Josephine hesitated. Her mother's warnings about strange men rang in her ears, but the alternatives were few, and the sun was setting on the empty prairie. "I would be grateful, Mr. Yates." "Just Ben," he corrected, offering a calloused hand to help her onto his horse. Ben mounted behind her, keeping a respectful distance as they rode toward Cottonwood Springs. The rhythm of the horse beneath them and the vastness of the star-filled sky above made Josie acutely aware of how small she was in this enormous country. "You got family back east?" Ben asked, breaking the silence. "None living," she answered. "My parents passed last winter, influenza." "I'm sorry to hear that." "It's why I answered Mr. Peterson's advertisement. He wanted a wife, and I wanted somewhere to belong." The admission hung in the air between them. "Brave thing you did," Ben said quietly, "coming all this way on the promise of a letter." Josephine didn't feel brave. She felt foolish and terrified, but she straightened her spine and lifted her chin. "What other choice did I have?" As they crested a small rise, the lights of Cottonwood Springs appeared in the distance, a handful of flickering dots in a sea of darkness. Ben directed his horse toward the largest building, a 2-story structure with a sign that read Silver Dollar Hotel and Dining Room. "Mrs. Abigail Foster runs this place," Ben explained as they dismounted. "She's stern but fair. She might have work for you, at least until you decide your next move." Josephine brushed dust from her wedding dress, suddenly conscious of her appearance. "I'm not sure what skills I have that would be valuable here." Ben's eyes softened. "Can you read, of course, right? Cipher?" "Yes." "Then you already know more than most folks in these parts. Come on, I'll introduce you." Mrs. Foster was a formidable woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair pulled into a tight bun. She looked Josephine up and down with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. "A mail-order bride with no groom," she summarized after hearing Josephine's story. "Well, you wouldn't be the first nor the last. I could use help with the books and the correspondence. Room and board plus $2 a week." It was a pittance, but it was something. "Thank you, Mrs. Foster." "I accept." "Good. Ben, help her with her things." "This is all I have," Josephine said, indicating the small carpet bag at her feet. Mrs. Foster's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Well then, let me show you to your room." As Mrs. Foster led her toward the stairs, Josephine turned back. "Thank you, Mr. Yates." Ben nodded, hat in hand. "Those shoes walked you to me for a reason, Miss Harlow. I reckon the good Lord ain't finished with your journey just yet." Josephine lay awake that night in the small but clean room, contemplating the strange turn her life had taken. The man she'd traveled across the country to marry was dead. She was alone in a town where she knew no one, with only the clothes on her back and the few belongings in her carpet-bag. And yet, there was a curious sense of possibility in the air, as if the vast frontier outside her window offered something she couldn't yet name. She thought of Benjamin Yates, of his steady hands and storm-gray eyes. Of the gentle way he'd helped her down from his horse, as if she were made of porcelain. There had been something in his gaze, not pity, but a kind of recognition, as if he understood what it meant to be alone in the world. The next morning, Josephine rose early, changed into her one other dress, a sensible blue cotton, and went downstairs to begin her new duties. Mrs. Foster was already up, giving instructions to a young girl who was sweeping the dining room floor. "Ah, Miss Harlow. This is Clara, she helps with the cleaning and cooking. Clara, this is Miss Harlow, she'll be helping with the books and correspondence." Clara couldn't have been more than 16, with a dusting of freckles across her nose and bright, curious eyes. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Harlow." "Please call me Josie." Mrs. Foster sniffed. "I'll show you the office. It's a mess, I warn you. My eyes aren't what they used to be for the small writing, and I've fallen behind." The office was a small room off the main dining area with a desk covered in papers, ledgers, and ink bottles. Mrs. Foster wasn't exaggerating, it was indeed a mess. "I'll leave you to it," she said. "Breakfast is served at 7. Josephine surveyed the chaos and rolled up her sleeves. Organization had always been her strong suit, and having a task to focus on would help keep her mind off her uncertain future. By midday, she had made considerable progress, sorting the correspondence by date and beginning to make sense of the financial ledgers. The hotel was doing well, it seemed, though Mrs. Foster's bookkeeping was somewhat haphazard. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't hear the knock at first. When she looked up, Benjamin Yates was standing in the doorway, hat in hand. "Miss Harlow," he greeted her. "Mrs. Foster said I'd find you here." "Mr. Yates," she responded, surprised at how pleased she was to see him. "What brings you to town?" "Had some business at the Mercantile," he said, then hesitated. "And I wanted to make sure you were settling in all right." "That's very kind of you." "I am, thank you," Ben nodded, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Mrs. Foster's a good woman for all her gruffness. She's been very accommodating." An awkward silence stretched between them. "I should let you get back to your work," Ben finally said, placing his hat back on his head. "Mr. Yates," Josephine called as he turned to leave. "I never properly thanked you for your assistance yesterday. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." Ben's smile transformed his weathered face. "Just happened to be in the right place, I guess. Nevertheless, I am grateful. It was my pleasure, Miss Harlow." He tipped his hat and departed, leaving Josephine with a strange, fluttering sensation in her chest. Over the next few weeks, Josephine settled into a routine at the Silver Dollar. She organized the books, handled correspondence, and even helped Clara with the cleaning when the hotel was particularly busy. Mrs. Foster proved to be a fair employer, if somewhat taciturn, and the townspeople were generally welcoming, if curious about the Boston woman in their midst. Benjamin Yates visited the hotel with increasing frequency, though he always had a plausible reason: supplies to deliver, messages to relay, business with other patrons. Each time, he would find an excuse to speak with Josephine, and each conversation left her more intrigued by this quiet, thoughtful cowboy. She learned that Ben ran a modest cattle operation about 5 miles outside of town, that he had come to Wyoming Territory 10 years earlier after serving in the Union Army during the Civil War, and that he had a reputation as a fair and honest businessman. What she didn't learn, at least not directly from him, was that he had never shown such interest in any woman in town before. This piece of information came from Clara, who delivered it with a knowing smile that made Josephine blush to the roots of her hair. On a crisp October morning, Ben arrived at the hotel earlier than usual, catching Josephine as she was sweeping the front porch. "Miss Harlow," he greeted her, removing his hat. "I was wondering if you might consider joining me for a ride this afternoon. I'd like to show you some of the countryside if you're interested." Josephine hesitated. She had been in Cottonwood Springs for nearly a month now, but had ventured little beyond the confines of the hotel and the main street. "I'm not much of a rider, I'm afraid." Ben smiled. "Daisy's gentle as a lamb, and I thought you might like to see a bit more of Wyoming than just the inside of Mrs. Foster's hotel." There was something in his eyes, a hopeful vulnerability that she hadn't seen before. Josephine found herself nodding before she had fully considered the implications. "I would like that, thank you. I'll come by after the noon meal," he said, a grin spreading across his face. "Wear something comfortable." Mrs. Foster raised an eyebrow when Josephine asked for the afternoon off, but gave her permission with a knowing look that suggested she had expected this development. Clara was more openly enthusiastic, helping Josephine fix her hair and insisting she borrow a blue ribbon that matches your eyes perfectly. Ben arrived at precisely 1 o'clock, leading 2 horses, his own sturdy chestnut gelding and a smaller, dappled mare that Josephine assumed was Daisy. He helped her mount with gentle hands, and soon they were riding west out of town, toward the mountains that had been a constant backdrop to Josephine's new life. "It's beautiful," she breathed as they crested a small hill, revealing a panorama of golden prairie grass stretching to the foothills, which were ablaze with autumn colors. "Different from Boston, I imagine," Ben replied, watching her face. "In every possible way," she agreed. "There's so much space. In Boston, there are always buildings, people, noise. Here, it's as if the land goes on forever." "Does that frighten you?" Josephine considered the question carefully. "When I first arrived, yes. Now I find it rather exhilarating." Ben's smile was warm. "I felt the same way when I first came west, like I could breathe properly for the first time." They rode in companionable silence for a while before Ben directed their horses toward a small creek lined with cottonwood trees. He helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. "I brought some coffee," he said, somewhat awkwardly, as if suddenly unsure of himself. "And Mrs. Davis at the bakery gave me some of her apple hand pies." "That sounds wonderful," Josephine replied, touched by his thoughtfulness. They sat on a fallen log by the creek, drinking coffee from tin cups and eating the delicious pies. Ben told her stories about his cattle, about the characters in town, about the changing seasons in Wyoming. Josephine found herself laughing more than she had in months. "You have a beautiful laugh," Ben said suddenly, his voice soft. "First time I heard it at the hotel last week when Clara dropped that stack of plates, I couldn't get the sound out of my head." Josephine felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Mr. Yates, Ben," he corrected gently. "Please." "Ben," she conceded, meeting his gaze. "I'm not sure what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he assured her. I wanted you to know that I'm glad those shoes of yours walked you to Cottonwood Springs. Even if it wasn't where you thought you were headed." The sincerity in his voice made something flutter in Josephine's chest. "I'm beginning to think that perhaps this is exactly where I was meant to be," she admitted. Ben's smile was like sunrise breaking over the prairie. He didn't push further, didn't try to take her hand or move closer. But something had shifted between them, a door opening to possibilities neither had voiced aloud. As they rode back to town in the golden light of late afternoon, Josephine found herself studying Ben's profile against the backdrop of the mountains. He was not what she had imagined for herself when she'd boarded that train in Boston, bound for a new life in the West. But there was a steadiness to him, a quiet strength that called to something deep within her. The next few weeks brought more rides, more conversations, and a deepening connection that both exhilarated and terrified Josephine. Ben was patient, never presuming, always respectful. But the way his eyes followed her when they were in the same room, the way his voice softened when he spoke her name, these things told her that his feelings ran as deep as her own. November brought the first snowfall, transforming Cottonwood Springs into a glistening wonderland that reminded Josephine painfully of the Christmases of her childhood. One evening, as she was closing up the office, Ben appeared in the doorway, snow dusting his shoulders and hat. "I was hoping to catch you before you turned in," he said, removing his hat. "I've got something to ask you." Josephine's heart quickened. "What is it?" "The town's holding a Christmas social at the church on Saturday. There'll be music and dancing." He twisted his hat in his hands. "I was wondering if you might do me the honor of accompanying me." The formal phrasing made her smile. "I would be delighted, Ben." Relief washed over his features. "Good, that's good." He started to leave, then turned back. "Josie." It was the first time he'd used the diminutive of her name, and it sent a warm shiver through her. "Yes, I'm not much of a dancer, I should warn you," she laughed. "I'm sure we'll manage just fine." The night of the social arrived crisp and clear, with stars strewn across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Josephine wore her best dress, a deep blue wool that Clara had helped her alter to better fit the current fashion, and the pearl earrings that had been her mother's. When Ben arrived to escort her, he stopped dead in his tracks, staring at her as if seeing her for the first time. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you," she replied, noting with pleasure that he had trimmed his beard and was wearing a clean shirt with a string tie. "You look quite handsome yourself." The church was transformed with evergreen boughs and red ribbons, lanterns casting a warm glow over the proceedings. Nearly everyone in town was present, and Josephine found herself introduced to those she hadn't yet met in her time at the hotel. They danced, and despite Ben's warnings, he moved with the same natural grace he showed on horseback. He kept a proper distance between them, but his hand at her waist felt like a brand, and when their eyes met during a lively reel, the intensity in his gaze made her miss a step. Later, as they took a break from dancing, Ben led her outside to the church porch. The night was cold but still, their breath forming clouds in the air. "I've been wanting to talk to you," Ben said, his voice serious. "About the future." Josephine's pulse quickened. "Oh. I know you came out here expecting to marry Peterson and things haven't worked out the way you planned." He took a deep breath. "But I was hoping. That is, I was wondering if you might consider staying in Cottonwood Springs, permanently." "Are you asking what I think you're asking, Ben?" He met her gaze squarely. "I'm asking if you might consider me as a husband, Josie. Not right away, I'd court you properly first, give you time to be sure. But I've known since that first day, when I saw you standing there in your wedding dress with those dusty shoes, that you were something special." Josephine felt tears prick at her eyes. "I've been thinking about leaving," she admitted. "Going back east, perhaps. I received a letter from a cousin in Philadelphia last week offering me a place to stay." Ben's face fell, but he nodded. "I understand. The West isn't for everyone." "But," she continued, reaching out to take his hand, "I've realized that there's nothing for me back there. My life is here now." She squeezed his fingers. "With you, if you'll have me." The smile that broke across Ben's face was like sunrise after the darkest night. "Is that a yes?" "It's a I'd like you to court me properly, Mr. Yates, and then we'll see," she replied with a teasing smile. Ben laughed, then grew serious again. "May I kiss you, Miss Harlow?" In answer, Josephine rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief but full of promise, and when they parted, Ben looked at her as if she had hung the moon and stars. "I think we should go back inside before Mrs. Foster sends out a search party," Josephine said, her voice unsteady. Ben offered her his arm. "As you wish, Miss Harlow." Winter settled over Wyoming territory with a vengeance, but the cold days were brightened by Ben's daily visits to the hotel. True to his word, He courted Josephine, properly bringing small gifts, taking her on sleigh rides when the weather permitted, and spending long evenings by the fire in the hotel parlor, talking about their hopes and dreams. Josephine learned that Ben's parents had died when he was young, that he had been raised by an uncle who had been harsh but fair, that he had joined the Union Army at 18 and had seen horrors that still sometimes woke him in the night. He spoke of his dream to expand his cattle operation, to build a proper house to replace the cabin he currently lived in, to perhaps one day have children who would grow up knowing the freedom of the Wyoming plains. In turn, she told him of her childhood in Boston, of her father's bookshop where she had spent countless hours reading everything from Shakespeare to penny dreadfuls, of her mother's gentle guidance, and the void their deaths had left in her life. She spoke of her fear of ending up like so many women she had known, dependent on the charity of distant relatives, fading into spinsterhood and obscurity. "That would never have happened," Ben said fiercely. "A woman like you, you'd have found your way, Josie. You're too strong to fade." His faith in her was like a balm to wounds she hadn't realized were still raw. As Christmas approached, the entire town buzzed with preparations. Josephine found herself swept up in the community spirit, helping to organize a special dinner at the hotel for those who had no family to celebrate with. Ben insisted on providing the beef for the meal, and together they spent hours planning every detail. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell gently outside, the dining room of the Silver Dollar was filled with laughter and conversation. Mrs. Foster, usually so reserved, had donned a festive red shawl and was actually smiling as she moved among the guests. Clara darted about, refilling glasses and passing plates with cheerful efficiency. And Ben, seated at Josephine's side, watched her with such open adoration that several of the town's matrons exchanged knowing glances. "I have something for you," Ben said quietly, as the evening was winding down. He produced a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Josephine unwrapped it carefully to reveal a small leather-bound book of poetry, Tennyson, her favorite. "Ben, it's beautiful, but how did you know? You mentioned it once when we were riding. Said your father had a copy in his shop that you used to read when business was slow." He looked suddenly uncertain. "Do you like it?" "I love it," she assured him, touching the embossed cover reverently. "I have something for you as well." Her gift to him was a hand-knitted scarf, midnight blue, to match his eyes, that she had worked on secretly during the long evenings after he had left the hotel. "You made this?" he asked, running his fingers over the soft wool. "Mrs. Foster taught me." "I'm afraid it's not perfect. There are a few dropped stitches." "It's the finest thing I've ever owned," he said with such sincerity that she had to blink back tears. Later, as Ben was preparing to leave, they stood on the hotel porch, reluctant to part despite the late hour and the falling snow. "I've been thinking," Ben said, brushing a snowflake from her cheek with gentle fingers, "about what you said when I asked if I could court you." "Oh," Josephine's heart began to race. "You said we'll see. I'm wondering if you've seen enough yet to make a decision." Josephine smiled up at him, snow catching in her eyelashes. "Are you proposing to me on Christmas Eve, Benjamin Yates?" "I reckon I am," he said, suddenly dropping to one knee on the snow-covered porch. "Josephine Harlow, would you do me the very great honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, with all my heart." Ben rose to his feet and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left her breathless. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "When I saw you standing there on the road that day, with your dusty shoes and your wedding dress, I never imagined I'd be thanking God for putting you in my path." "Those shoes walked me to you," Josephine said softly. "They brought me exactly where I needed to be." They were married in the spring, when the prairie was ablaze with wildflowers. The entire town turned out for the wedding, held in the same church where they had danced at the Christmas social. Josephine wore a new dress, cream-colored silk, ordered specially from Denver, and carried a bouquet of prairie flowers that Clara had helped gather that morning. But on her feet, polished to a shine but still bearing the marks of her journey, were the same sturdy boots that had carried her from Boston to Wyoming, from one life to another. As Ben took her hands in his and spoke his vows in a voice that rang with conviction, Josephine knew with absolute certainty that her long journey had led her exactly where she was meant to be. Not to Harold Peterson's homestead, but to this man, this town, this life that stretched before them full of promise and possibility. In the years that followed, as their ranch prospered and their family grew, Josephine kept those boots in a special place. Sometimes, when the children were asleep and the house was quiet, she would take them out and run her fingers over the worn leather, remembering the young woman who had stood alone at a crossroads, uncertain of her future. "What are you thinking about?" Ben would ask, finding her lost in thought. And she would smile up at the man who had become her world, her heart full to bursting with gratitude for the twisted path that had led her to him. Just that sometimes the longest journeys lead us exactly where we're meant to be. Ben would pull her into his arms then, and they would stand together, looking out over the land that was their home, the life they had built together from nothing but hope and hard work and love. And Josephine would think of those dusty shoes, of the crossroads where she had stood alone, and of the cowboy who had seen not a stranded bride but a woman at the beginning of a new journey, a journey that had only just begun.